Some years are overshadowed by finances, some by politics, and some by conflict. In Asia, all three will linger throughout 2020. China's economic slowdown will continue to delineate the regional economic outlook. Additionally, due to uncertainties over global trade agreements, many governments are left with no tools to address their local issues. This has given rise to economic inequality and financial austerity measures, which have resulted in social unrest. So let's talk about the risks, trends, and overall geopolitics of Asia Pacific in 2020. I'm your host Shirvan, and welcome to Caspian Report. We all have too many passwords, and it's a hassle to keep track of them all. With Dashlane, you can create and manage your most important info and accounts while you're on the move. No more retyping or mistakes. Dashlane even autofills forms, automatically logs you in, or checks out online with just a click. Your data is encrypted, only you have access to it. So ease your web browsing experience. Go to dashlane.com/CaspianReport to get a 30-day free trial, or use the promo code CaspianReport to get 10% off the premium account. Starting our journey in China, the trade war between Washington and Beijing is expected to ease in the coming year. More than $600 billion in tariffs have been imposed on goods since the trade tensions began 2 years ago. But this year, with the signing of the Phase 1 trade deal, we will see a reduction of some US tariffs and a boost in Chinese purchases of American goods. The Phase 1 deal will also call China to implement reforms on intellectual property rights and regulations on technology transfers. It's doubtful that lawmakers in Beijing will be able to meet all the conditions, but even if the deal fails, there are mechanisms to prevent it from collapsing altogether. It's not a waterproof deal, but it will allow tensions to ease regarding trade. The Phase 1 deal will likely last through November, allowing President Trump to claim victory for his trade policy during the US presidential election. In the long term, however, the economic agendas of the United States and China leave little room for cooperation, and a comprehensive trade agreement remains beyond reach for the foreseeable future. Elsewhere in China, social unrest in Hong Kong will become the new normal. The reach of the demonstrations is likely to grow and shrink in the coming months, but the radical segment of the protest movement is likely to reject any political concession that is brought forth. So we're looking at a prolonged political impasse with continued standoffs in the streets. There's also a distinct possibility that the disruption of business activity in Hong Kong could send the city into a recession in 2020. Overall though, the situation will remain manageable as long as the demonstrations don't escalate into citywide unrest. Otherwise, Beijing will feel compelled to intervene. In Taiwan, the re-election of the pro-independence faction will seal the fate of the country. The recent elections were as much about politics as a referendum on Taiwan's identity. With the victory of the pro-independence faction, Taiwan is likely to bolster cooperation with the Southeast Asian states while reinforcing strategic ties to the United States. It's noteworthy to mention that in 2018, Trump signed legislation to boost military support to Taiwan but never truly acted on it. Now, with the victory of the pro-independence faction, Trump's bill may yet materialize in a new arms deal. Either way, these developments will not sit well with the Chinese leadership. So starting from 2020 and beyond, we will see increasingly tense relations between the United States, China, and Taiwan. Moving on to North Korea, where for the past 2 years Washington and Pyongyang have been negotiating on denuclearization. The talks will continue in 2020, but the North Koreans are unlikely to roll back their nuclear program. What we could see instead is that the Trump government reduces some of its sanctions in exchange for minor concessions on North Korea's missile program. It's also possible that the North Korean delegation freezes the talks as the US presidential election comes near, a tactic meant to increase pressure on the White House. This could of course go entirely wrong and give rise to a new political crisis, so in 2020 North Korea will remain East Asia's primary wildcard. Meanwhile, in South Korea, the Trump-initiated cost-sharing agreement will be a big part of the conversation, but a deal is unlikely to be reached this year. There is too much haggle room between the two allies. The White House demands $5 billion, which is well above the current one-year deal where the South Koreans pay about $1 billion. With so much wiggle room, negotiations on this topic will continue beyond this year. As for Japan, 2020 will be a year of soul-searching. Its trade dispute with South Korea over compensation for Imperial Japan's Korean victims will endure with no end in sight. Meanwhile, China and North Korea are likely to increase hostile rhetoric in the East China Sea. At the same time, the White House demands exponentially more in defense cost sharing. Tokyo has long acted with hesitation and caution regarding its military, but these regional developments will accelerate Japan's rearmament program. In South Asia, conflict and security risks are abound. At the heart of the issue is Kashmir. After Prime Minister Narendra Modi revoked the semi-autonomous status of Jammu and Kashmir in August 2019, the situation has gone from bad to worse. Kashmir remains in a communications blackout, thousands of citizens have been arrested, and nearly all the local political leaders are in detention. There is basically no freedom of movement, speech, or expression. India's Supreme Court is still considering the legality of Modi's decision, but the Prime Minister isn't done yet. In 2020, Modi is likely to continue the crackdown on Kashmir while encouraging the migration of non-Kashmiri Hindus into the region to redesign the indigenous ethnic layout. These measures will fuel homegrown secessionist tendencies, and the danger is that a large militant attack on Indian soldiers would force New Delhi to retaliate against Islamabad, regardless of whether Pakistan is complicit in the plan. Yes, Kashmir Valley is ground zero in the Indian subcontinent, but for Modi, it takes a back seat in the craft of national policy. The thing is, India's economy is in the midst of its third downturn since the global financial crisis, so reviving GDP growth is New Delhi's primary challenge for 2020, with Kashmir acting as a PR stimulus for domestic audiences. Here's how Kashmir and the Indian economy are intrinsically tied together. To increase GDP growth, Modi needs to pass numerous labor and land legislations, for which the ruling party needs to increase its seats in the upper house of the parliament. The only way to do that is by winning state elections. 2 such elections are scheduled for 2020, one in Delhi and another in Bihar. For Modi, this will be the #1 political test over the economy. Winning the upcoming state elections will advance the economic reforms, and what better way to win elections than an emphasis on Hindu nationalism across India, with Kashmir acting as ground zero. As for Pakistan, the country is under substantial internal stress from numerous militants, while the economy is desperate for international investment. Periodic protests in the capital are likely to maintain momentum, but Prime Minister Imran Khan's position in office is secure for 2020. In Bangladesh and Myanmar, Beijing has proposed an infrastructure corridor to connect China with the Bay of Bengal. It's a project that is inspired by the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, albeit to a smaller scale. India is not happy with China's intrusion in what the Indians consider their backyard. As a countermeasure, India is now in talks with the Philippines to arm the Filipino military with BrahMos supersonic cruise missiles. If the deal goes ahead, it would drastically improve the military capacity of Manila and grant the country more say in its foreign policy. It could also provoke the Chinese to sell similarly advanced weaponry to Pakistan. To the northwest in Afghanistan, the conflict with the United States will enter its 19th anniversary in October, but a peace settlement still remains beyond reach. In 2020, Washington will proceed to bargain for a diplomatic solution with the Taliban. Phase 1 of the deal is for the Taliban to reduce violence and cut ties with ISIS and Al-Qaeda. In return, Washington would reduce its number of troops in Afghanistan. The deal is not foolproof, but it is supported by regional states like Russia, China, Pakistan, and Iran. Considering how many conflicting interests these nations hold, it's safe to say that peace in Afghanistan is the sole common interest in all of Asia. That said, a lot of uncertainty lingers over the negotiations, with two events standing out. The Taliban is expected to launch its annual spring offensive in April, while the Afghan government will hold presidential elections in September. The intermission between the two events is too short of a duration to yield in any progress. So unfortunately, it will be another year of violence in Afghanistan. All said, Asia is a big place, and regrettably, we cannot go over every state separately, but with this forecast, we do get a glimpse of what's in store for Asia Pacific in 2020. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. Once again, special thanks to Dashlane for sponsoring this video. Now if you want to gain access to some exclusive perks like early access, PDF files, etc., sign up for our YouTube membership plan or join us on Patreon. Thank you for watching, and so